Resistance, burnout, procrastination, sleepless nights, stress, and painful hard work. Fatigued from running on the high achiever hamster wheel? This is the Bold Leadership Revolution, where we develop high-performing leaders to live, thrive, and lead bold and smart, not hard. Here is Tara Newman and co-host Joe Gifford.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of the Bold Leadership Revolution podcast. And today we are talking about if I had to do it all over again, what would I do? And I'm super excited today because we're going to be diving into the last 2.5, almost 3 years of my life, going from corporate crusader to an entrepreneur, and key decisions that I've made, what's worked, what didn't work, what would I change? And today we have with us the illustrious Joe Gifford.
Illustrious. Wow. Hi, Tara.
Illustrious Joe Gifford, who I couldn't think of a better human to have recording this episode with me because Joe has been with me from actually before the beginning.
Yeah, that sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? Yeah. And before the beginning, there was Joe.
Yeah. So in the fall of 2014, for me was a time where I was really frustrated trying to seek clarity around what I wanted to do next. And I'm sure that whether you're an entrepreneur or I work with a lot of executives, we all kind of hit this spot where we've been successful and then it's like, now what? And, my life looked good on paper, but it wasn't truly fulfilling me. And I had some decisions to make. And I was super frustrated because I was trying to think my way to clarity. And what I found out along the way is that clarity comes through taking action. And one of the first actions that I took was to do a big, giant ass search on the World Wide Web.
A giant ass search, nonetheless.
And I had been a blogger for a few years at this point. And I was like, okay, I have this audience coming to me, listening to what I am speaking about. They're engaging with me. I've met a tremendous amount of friends and colleagues through blogging. And I wanted to figure out how I could leverage this blog into a business. And so upon that search in December of 2014, I stumbled upon this really sassy woman with this really cool website that had a course, I believe at the time, that was called Blogging for Business. Would that be you, Joe Gifford?
That would, Tara Newman. That was me.
So through this random internet search, and I fell on Joe's blog, and Joe does such a great job with content direction, and that's why she is on my team as my content director. Did you like I just gave you that title?
I really like that. I was going to flag that up to you later.
So Joe is now, flash forward 3 years, my content director. But when I got to her website, I was obsessed and I devoured every single blog post you had there. And what I found through devouring every one of Joe's blog posts was that she and I had a lot in common. And I jumped on her list. I first bought a $10 product of yours about images and graphics for blog posts because Joe's really multi-talented, right? So Joe does graphics. She has a design background and she's got the writing background. She just has it all going on.
I love it.
And so I get on Joe's list and she sends out an email about your USP. Do you remember this?
I do. Yes.
Right. Can you tell people what a USP is?
Hi, everyone. So yes, a USP is, in marketing terms, it's your unique selling point.
Yeah. And in Joe's email about her unique selling point, she goes into how she's a human being. And she's talking about her struggles with chronic illness and chronic fatigue. And I was like, oh my God, really? Me too.
Yes, we so have that, didn't we? We're like, oh my goodness, we've both got these health things. We've both got kids at the same sort of age. Wow.
Yeah. And then she goes on in this email about how she has her master's degree.
Yes.
What do you have your master's degree in?
My MA is in design management.
Right. And I'm like, oh my God, I have a master's degree too. Right. And I'm like falling in love with this woman through this email. And I responded to her email and I said, oh my goodness, we have so much in common, and I told her a little bit about me and my USPs. And I bought her Blogging for Business boot camp, which was a self-study at the time.
Yeah, the first round was a live one and then it went to self-study. And actually, this is such a great example of, which we can delve more into like another time, but such a great example of how you did buy like a $10 thing and then it was my course. And now here we are 3 years later and I'm on your team.
But there's more. So Joe is like with me from the inception, right? Because I was wondering like, how do I go from being a blogger? Because I knew that some of the habits and behaviors and mindsets that I had as a blogger would work for me in my business and they wouldn't necessarily work for me in my business. And that I had to make this transition from pouring all my effort and energy into writing a blog post into running a business. So how could I make my blogging easier, smarter, more efficient, effective? And so Joe is like this productivity nerd. And guess what? I'm a productivity nerd too.
We nerded out, didn't we?
We did. And so from there, I started following Joe on social media and I've actually made friends through Joe's community at the time. And it really opened a lot of doors for me. So that was like the very, very inception. And that's really why I love that Joe is on this specific podcast with me where we're going to dive into where I've been and how far I've come and maybe some of the things that would work for you. That would give you a shift in perspective. And this is for you, even if you're not new in business, because maybe some of the things that I did, or maybe some of the mistakes I made, you're doing now. You're just doing them later in your business. And maybe you're not even running your own business, but some of the things that has worked for me or didn't work for me are things that aren't working for you right now, working for somebody else. And so this is really a podcast for anyone who's looking to just take a journey and listen to somebody else's journey and learn from somebody else's ups and downs, highs and lows, the things they've done well and the things they maybe haven't done so well. So I would love to kind of almost give this over to Joe for a few minutes and let her kind of ask me some questions so we can really start unpacking this experience.
Thanks, Tara. It's so lovely, actually, just kind of, reflecting back because I'd forgotten that email that I sent about the USP. And there's so many parts of watching your next stage, which I'm excited to sort of delve into. So Tara, now I remember back when you were in corporate and working full time, right? That's when we first met. And, here you were, you had this blog on the side that was phenomenal, that had sort of built up this audience that was family sport life, right? Yep. So it was all about, how you were combining your family and, your sporting activities and how it all worked together. And you wanted to go full time into your coaching. Mm-hmm. So what at the time was holding you back from making that leap? Do you remember?
I think that the biggest thing holding me back, and this is super funny. So the biggest thing holding me back was at the time, I had no idea right? I was really wrapped up in how. Mm-hmm. I had no idea how I was going to replace my 6-figure income with all the benefits working for myself. I was really stuck on that. And the reality is, I look forward now, and every year in my business, I have doubled my revenue. I am making way more than I was making in my corporate job. And to be honest, it doesn't even really matter because I am experiencing such true alignment with what I'm meant to be doing in the world that the money piece of it is almost irrelevant.
That's a huge thing to say, Tara. And, I know that I can imagine that for people listening who are sort of wanting to make that leap, to let go of that fear about the money is going to be huge for them.
Yeah. And I was even in that first year, so I worked for 9 months full time in my job while I was kind of getting this going on the side. And we're going to come back to that because that was actually something that really worked, believe it or not. And so even through those 9 months, I was convinced that I would say through 7 of those 9 months, I was convinced that I had to replace my income directly before leaving.
Right. Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
I was really wrapped tightly. My brain was really wrapped tightly around that concept that I was so in fear of my own financial security and safety, mainly because of prior experiences where this wasn't the first business that I had started. Even though I was working in a corporate environment 10, 12 years ago at this point, my husband and I started our first business and he left his corporate job. So we had already done this. He left his cushy 6-figure salary and went and started his own business. And it was a giant failure.
Right.
And so there was so much of that story and that experience still there for me that I needed to really have the time and space to work through.
And that's massive, right? So, you'd been through that experience where your husband had left, where John had left, and he'd done this business and it gone very badly wrong. And so here you are on the ledge of making this leap to step into what you know. You want to be really aligned with your next piece of your journey and you want to do your coaching and really step into what you can do. But you've got this huge goal to match what you're earning before you can fully leave.
Yeah. And, Joe, you said it went very badly wrong. And I just want to be real here for a moment. And when Joe says it went very badly wrong, it bankrupted us.
Right.
Literally bankrupted us.
Yeah.
We spent 5 years fighting for this business, not knowing how we were going to pay the mortgage, not knowing how we were going to feed our children. Me almost every weekend having a garage sale, selling everything I owned, whether we needed it or not. For example, my daughter never sat in a high chair because I sold it out from underneath her. So we can get some money for food and diapers and living expenses. And so it was bad. It was 5 years of financial catastrophe before we declared bankruptcy in that business so that we could be free and clear of it.
And oh my goodness. And when you hear the actual practicalities of that, Tara, selling the stuff at the weekend, that's so hard for us to sort of picture now because, you are super successful, but, and you had this great salary. So it would have been easy for you to just play it safe, right? And stay there and think, okay, we're all sorted now. I've got a salary. We're back on the up. But you knew you had this thing inside you.
Yeah. I mean, it had been my dream for 10 years prior to actually leaving my job, to leave my job and have my own business. I was raised by an entrepreneur. I came from an entrepreneurial family. My grandparents were either freelancers or entrepreneurs. My dad was an entrepreneur. Friends of our family were entrepreneurs. I mean, I've been in entrepreneurial business setting, small business setting my entire life. It's very much in my blood, the highs of it and the lows of it.
So even though that low was really, really low, you still knew. But this had taken you 10 years to get to the point where you're ready to kind of really do this. And the kids are at an age where you're like, right, we're sorted. I'm going to do this. And you wanted to match back your salary. Was that something that happened when you did leave?
That I matched back my salary?
Yeah.
Not right away. It definitely took some time, but also, so if we're going to talk about key decisions that went into me starting this business, this was actually a big key decision. So I had decided that for the first year in business, I was going to operate at a loss. I was going to take everything I earned in the business and reinvest it into the business. That I was not going to take a salary. We probably wouldn't show profit on the books at the end of the year. And that was fine with me.
That's a huge decision to make.
Yeah, because I knew there are so many times where people, freelancers, solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, whatever you want to call yourself, I've seen this over the years in intimate situations with people, I know who are entrepreneurs as well as working in a business setting, that small business owners have this sometimes bad habit of treating their business like a personal piggy bank.
And now I can certainly hands up and say that I've done that. And I'm sure lots of people listening can, right?
Right. Where they're running their business to just pay themselves or to take money out to support a lifestyle that they want. And listen, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're not leaving money in the business and you're not planning for investments, it will come back and bite you in the ass later down the line. And so I know that in the beginning of building a business, it takes capital. Mm-hmm. Even online service-based businesses that have lower overhead, it is not a no-cost investment. It's a lower cost investment, but it's not a no-cost investment. So from the very beginning, I was very clear with myself and my husband that there was not to be the intention of this business bringing in income right away.
And that conversation with John, I mean, was it something that you both agreed on straight away? I mean, he's an entrepreneur as well, or was it a tricky conversation? Because I'm just imagining people with their partners thinking, I've got to broach this, that I'm going to start this new thing and I'm not going to be bringing home much money in the first year.
So there are a lot of advantages to being married to another entrepreneur. And so the conversation with John was kind of like, he said to me, you realize that in the first 90 days of your business, the majority of your tasks will not be revenue generating tasks.
Right. Yeah.
You're going to be setting up your structure. You're going to be writing the business plan. You're going to be getting yourself oriented. It's going to be a slower start. So I hope you make money in the first 90 days of your business, but I also hope that we can manage the expectation. Mm-hmm. And the reality is I actually made a lot of money in my first 90 days of my business.
Yay. I love that.
But every overnight success is 20 years in the making.
Right. So let's look at that. Because it's so easy to see, Tara, isn't it? If we look at a lot of the curated stuff we might see online, that you make the leap and you follow your passion and, you suddenly have this lifestyle where we're sitting on a beach with a laptop, right? So how realistic is that for anyone expecting to make the leap?
I'm going to tell you what worked for me because that was part of what we were going to talk about. Key decisions. So my first key decision when I was first starting out, and even to this day, there is a key decision around how much I am reinvesting in my business, how much I am taking in income, in pay, in CEO salary, how much I am paying my team, what investments I'm making, right? So this is not just a conversation for day one of a business. This is the ongoing conversation that I'm having. And so what it looked like in year 2 was I'm going to be taking some CEO pay and I'm going to be reinvesting this amount of money, not willy-nilly. Here are the places where I need development, either in myself or in my business. So here's where I'm putting my money. Here's where I am not putting my money.
Yeah.
Here's what I will not do. I will not go into course FOMO, right? I will not go into shiny object syndrome. And I have very clear boundaries for myself around my learning, my development, and what I will invest in my business. And then in year 3, which is this year, I said, I'm going to more than double. Well, I've started out to double my CEO pay and I've more than doubled my CEO pay. And then this is what's going to be left for investment.
So you went in at this, you had a clear plan. You knew what you wanted to invest in and you knew, where your weaker skill set is, where you needed reinforcement, where you needed training in your business and personally.
Right. And, the relevance here for people who may not be an entrepreneur, who may not be in their businesses. If you want to be getting promoted, if you want to be making more money, just as an entrepreneur wants to make more money, you need to take full responsibility for what you're reinvesting into you. This isn't just an entrepreneur conversation. This is a high-performing human conversation.
Yeah. And how can we identify, Tara, those areas as high-performing humans, whether we're working in corporate or we are self-employed entrepreneurs? How can we take a good hard look at what we need to do for ourselves?
Okay, so I think this comes down to really being incredibly self-aware, right? What are your goals for the year and what resources do you need to achieve those goals? And then how can you bridge the gap? What do you need to bridge that gap? And what is the fastest way to bridge that gap? So a great question came in from a friend, a colleague, someone who's followed me, who's been in my audience for a long time, back to when I was a blogger, Kristen Hewitt. And Kristen is a writer. She's a sports journalist and she's a mom, and she writes some really funny, great, real stuff, vulnerable stuff around motherhood and things like that. And if you wanted to find her, you could find her at kristenhewitt.me. And one of her questions to me was, did you use a coach? And so when I was looking to make these investments, right, and I knew that I had a skill set that I needed to take on and that I needed to bridge a gap, and what was the fastest way to get me there? Yes, I hired a coach. And that is where I put most of my own personal development money every year. And in the first year of my business, there were a lot of people online who were taking a lot of courses. Yeah. They were taking B school and they were taking, I don't know. I can't even remember all the names of these courses, but they were taking like a ton of courses. And I'm like, well, I can either pay for all those courses and probably not use them, or I can hire a coach who has taken some of these courses and is a little bit ahead of me and who can share with me and coach me through what these courses covered. So that's really how I picked my first coach.
And that's a massive shortcut, right? Because you're getting one-on-one sort of coaching through stuff. And this also speaks to the value of coaching, doesn't it? Because you're, working with someone who has all that experience, all that skill, all that knowledge that they've been taking on themselves that is disseminated with their work with you.
Yeah. So, what worked for me when I first started out, and this really goes to my basic fundamental belief in terms of leadership development or people development, is that invest in people. Right. So when I invest my money in my business, I invest in people. I invest in coaches. I invest in team. I invest in an accountant. These are all people that I'm investing in. So that's really one of the first things that worked for me, is right out of the gates. I decided that I was going to invest in a coach, and they helped me initially put together packages and my services that I was going to sell. And I had an idea, because this was actually Kristen's other question. She asked, how did you learn to structure your business?
Yeah.
And for me, this was my wheelhouse. Right. So I happen to be, a lot of coaches struggle with the fact that there's two sides of the coaching business. There's the coaching, and then there's the business of coaching. And if you go through coach training school, they talk a lot about how to coach and how to be a great coach, but they don't talk about how to run a business as a coach. And so for me, I just happened to have both skill sets, because when I came out of graduate school, I came out of school with my degree in organizational development, which is how you develop organizations and people within those organizations. It talks about leadership development and training and development and motivation and goal setting and driving for results. And already by the time I left, I had already worked through my internship in a number of Fortune 100 and 500 company organizations, where I was helping them build their systems, their structures, and building their businesses to be profitable and sustainable through mainly people and organization and productivity. So what I knew, that I had everything I needed to make this successful, on top of watching my father run his business and build his business, on top of watching my grandparents do this and watching their successes and their failures.
Right. Yeah.
What worked for them and what didn't work for them, and how that struggle as an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, a freelancer, whatever you want to call yourself, trickles down and affects everything else. So when you make a mistake and you're undercharging, or you're undervaluing yourself and you're over delivering, the greater impact that has, not only on your finances, but on your family and on yourself. And so I already kind of knew how I wanted to do these things, but it was great to have a sounding board, really have that coach there as a sounding board to say, have you thought about this? What about this? Yes, I think that's going to work, because in my experience, I've seen this, this, and this.
Exactly. And, that's huge, because, even though you had all that experience in your DNA, from your grandparents, from your parents, in your marriage and your degree and this stuff. So you knew from your experience all of this stuff. And I love the fact that you still had a coach there with you, because it is that sounding board. It is that partnership. It is that extra brain with you, isn't it?
Yeah. And what I learned along the lines in my career is it's very different to understand it in theory.
Right.
And then go and actually apply it and have and get the result or the outcome that you were looking to get.
Yeah. And, when we're in our stuff, it's our stuff, isn't it? And, we can know things inside out, but sometimes, with the best intentions, you need extra expertise to help you through this.
Yeah. Now, I want to touch upon, I said before, John said to me, the first 90 days of your business, you're not going to be working on a lot of revenue generating tasks. So let's manage the expectation. And then I said to you, oh, but I was really successful. My first month of business, I actually made more money than I made in my bonus check for the entire year at work. And
Yes.
I remember getting handed that bonus check and going, oh, I'm so out of here.
Yeah, thanks for that. Bye.
All right, good. But so, and then I said an overnight success, 20 years in the making. So here are some of the things that went into that working.
Yeah.
One, I already had a platform. I had a blog. I had blog readers. I had people on an email list. I had social media following. I already had those things. I wasn't building that up from scratch. I also was doing exactly what I'd done my entire life in my career. I worked as an executive coach in performance management within an organization. I worked on organizational development, learning and development, and I just was doing it in a different setting. So I took all of my credibility and authority on the subject matter with me. So I wasn't doing a full pivot. I've seen people try and do this where they do something their whole life in one area and then immediately want to do this other thing. And there's always like this gap and this lag. The other thing that I had was my network. I had a network of people who already trusted me, who had already seen the results that I could deliver in a corporate setting and trusted me to deliver those results for them. So those are the things that really led into my initial success.
And what I love about those is, you had the blog and you had, your kind of email list and your social media presence. And for anyone who might be listening who doesn't have those, but they do have the authority and the experience, and your network, that is so important as well. The credibility that you already have in what you have done will drive you forward.
I will say too that the one thing that we all have working for us in new situations is newbie naivete.
Newbie naivete, I love it.
And really, I sometimes try and put myself mentally back in that position of a newbie so I could really leverage that, some of those initial naive notions, because it was in December of 2014, I sat down, I created a program, and I'm like, I'm just going to sell this thing.
It's out there. Done.
I had a list of like 100 people, and I'm like, I'm just going to sell this thing. And I think I sold 10 or 12 people into this program.
You did, yeah.
And I haven't always done that since. Like I did it once. It helped me in the beginning. And then I've had some failures after that. And then I've had some successes after that. Right. But like that newbie energy was really something to capitalize and to just take action, not overthink it.
There's so much to be said for that, isn't there? And there is that drive, isn't there? When you're brand new and you're so inspired by knowing that you're going to do your own thing and, hey, I'm just going to put this out to word. I'm going to ship and I'm going to see what happens. And you're so right. It sometimes works. And then you try to repeat it. And because there perhaps wasn't a structure in place when you did it the first time around, maybe we can't repeat it and we learn. But yeah, there is such a drive behind that force.
And I think that whole piece about not overthinking it, because so many times we get stuck trying to think ourselves into clarity or plan, but never take any action. And heck, I'm all for planning, but then you have to get into execution mode and you need to actually take action on it. And I will also say that, having this blog, and at this point, I probably had this blog for 2 years, I was giving value, and never asking to be paid. So 2 years of delivering value. And then all of a sudden, hey, I have this thing to sell. People were like, oh my God, this is fabulous.
Yes. Yeah.
Like we want to know more. We want to know what that next step is for us in this thing that she talks about. And we want some of that. And her content is so valuable. We're happy to pay her for this experience.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting as well in the shift that you have made from running Family Sport Life, the blog, and from gaining that readership and that platform to where you are now, your brand has shifted, your offering has shifted, but people who were there with you then are still with you now because, people move with you through that shift. And well, they either do or they don't, right? You sort of shed some people who are never going to be with you for the next bit. But in general, if they've been following you for a while, and I have this too, right? Because when you first met me, my blog was Dexterous Diva, which sprang from, me blogging about being a mum with twins in the creative industries and then grew into this whole kind of content offering. And I've shifted, but I know that people have stayed with me through all of that. And so it also speaks to start putting stuff out there and sharing your journey because you do build that platform sooner rather than later.
Yeah. And I will say, I'll give the last thing. I could sit here and talk about this for hours as to what worked for me. And I will give a last bit on what really worked. And we're also going to be digging in later episodes this season. We're going to unpack my year this year. So year 3 in business, we're going to unpack. So you're going to get even more lessons learned from my year this year. So we're going to hold off on some of those. But I will share that the other thing that really worked for me was having a strategic planning process. And this is something that I've taken with me for the last 20 years, that the strategic planning process that I use is the same strategic planning process that I used as an intern in these Fortune 100 and 500 companies, in all the businesses that I've ever worked in. In my personal life, I use the same strategic planning process in my personal life to perform well and achieve the goals that I want to achieve. And I used it when I started my business. I use it quarterly. I use it annually in my business. But the point is that taking the time out to self-reflect, to look at things strategically, and to plan is a critical part in generating revenue.
So many of us don't do that. I know, myself, I'm someone who goes into the details, shall we say, and we have worked together with you, with you as my coach as well. And when you walk me through that system, it's a game changer. It's phenomenal.
Yeah. This is common among so many of my clients and so many people who reach out to me that they feel like they've been accidentally successful, that they may be operating from a framework or a plan, but it's in their head and it's not written out. It's not captured. It's not reevaluated in a consistent way. And I've walked into multiple 7-figure businesses and they've told me they want to double their revenue. And I look at them and I go, great. Like, what's the plan? And they look at me like I have 5 heads. And I'm like, okay, like I really didn't think that in a company that's got $15 million in revenue that I needed to sit down and walk them through revenue planning. But it happens. You do. It's, people start businesses because they're good at one particular thing. And that one particular thing doesn't mean they're actually good at running a business.
Right.
And so it really happens to everybody. And I was just in this unique place that my thing that I'm really good at is business strategy.
Which when you start your own business is really helpful.
Yeah. So I will say that taking the time out to do the things that don't seem all that important, like coming up with a plan, reviewing it regularly, and having some kind of strategic thinking process. And it doesn't have to be my process. It could be your process. It has to be what works for you, but just to have one.
And why do you think people avoid that? Is it just lack of knowing that we need one? Is it fear?
I think part of it is maybe they don't realize they need one, or they don't see. So a lot of entrepreneurs are really stuck in generating quick cash and not planning for long-term revenue. And so if you want to generate quick cash, anybody can go out and generate quick cash. I can usually have an hour-long conversation with somebody and they can go out and generate $7,000 to $15,000 based on an hour conversation. They have it within them, in their network, in their area of expertise, in their ability to do that quickly. But that gets really exhausting if you're always having to get out there and generate quick cash and not have a long-term plan. So I think that, and a lot of entrepreneurs, their only view of progress is cash.
Yeah.
Is the money piece. And that's not necessarily true either. If we're building a sustainable and healthy business, there are other things that matter that go beyond the money. Money's important. You need it to run a business. I'm not negating that. But at some point, we have to go beyond the immediacy of it. Otherwise, you just wind up in a feast or famine cash flow problem. So why don't we talk about my failures?
Let's go there. Let's go there,
always
Tara.
so much fun. The things that didn't work.
Because that's good to hear, because I'm just thinking about people listening who think, oh, dang, she had it all sorted when she started her business. So let's dig into some of that.
No. I did not have it all sorted at all. Okay, so when I first started my business, you have to realize I was working for 8 or 9 months in my corporate career. I was coaching people from the car, from the corner, from the closet.
Coaching from the closet and the corner. I love it.
And so things were really hectic and I was already burned out, which is, why I started this business, was to heal from burnout, which we talk about in a future episode. Episode 5, I believe, is all about how to build a business or how to grow a business if you're feeling burned out.
So this is interesting, Tara. So you were already burned out. You know you want to do your own thing, but you've got this middle ground where where you're coaching after your corporate hours, where you are in the closet and on the corner and in the car. So you've got this extra pressure right now at this point.
Yeah. And I knew that I was going to spend a year making my health situation worse before I could make it better. And for me, it was about mitigating how much worse I was going to make it before I improved it.
So you knew, and I know as someone who's had adrenal fatigue, that has chronic fatigue and all these kind of things, that is very much a management thing. And you took a calculated movement to get worse before that got better.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can consider my health a bit of a failure in that respect. The fact that I was intentionally digging myself into a deeper hole in order to make it better, but it was short-lived. So I think some of my biggest failures came when it came to mindset and fear. Okay. Which you could probably say for a lot of people.
Oh, goodness. I've got my hands up all over the place here with those ones. So tell me, what were your biggest mindset gremlins, Tara, at this point?
Okay. So when I first decided to start my own business and I already had a blog, I was not new to the online world, but I was new to trying to figure out how to use the internet and social media to grow my business.
Right.
So with that, I went into some Facebook groups that were specifically targeting entrepreneurs and female entrepreneurs. And it got really noisy really fast in those groups. And it went from being helpful to being hurtful very quickly.
When you say hurtful, do you mean it's a personally hurtful to you or a hurtful and noisy environment?
A hurtful and noisy environment, one where, I was confident in the direction that I was going in, and then I allowed other people to speak into that direction by seeking feedback in these groups.
Right.
That then made me think twice about my initial direction.
Right. So you might post something and then there'd be comments on it and you'd be questioning whether you've done the right thing.
Yeah. And then the story that you start telling yourself. And the reality is that I didn't know the person who was giving me feedback from a hole in the wall. I mean, they weren't necessarily any smarter than me or any more knowledgeable than me, but I perceived them to be because they were giving me advice.
Right. So you opened yourself up for this critique in an environment that may or may not have been the most useful place to do it.
Yeah. So I really was not discerning enough in who I let speak into some of my direction and decisions. And that really hurt me for actually a long time after I decided to put a boundary up, because those stories that I told myself that they know better than me, I must not know what I'm doing because they have a different opinion. They don't understand what I'm talking about, so I must not know what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah.
My message isn't clear to them, so I must not know how to message what I do. Some of these stories became pervasive, and it took me a really long time to let them go.
And that's a really big point there. Getting the feedback from people who are not the right people to give you that feedback and not being discerning has had a massive effect. And I know I've been there as well. And you can soak it up like a sponge. And it is very destructive.
Yeah. So I would say that. And when I say I'm going to probably give you one or two, mistakes, but the reality is these mistakes took me a really long time to get over.
Wow.
So while you might go, oh, well, she starting her business, she only made 2 mistakes. Like, isn't she lucky? No, like these 2 mistakes have taken me probably until very recently to move past. And podcast actually is the culmination of me moving past some of these mistakes.
Right.
And really owning a more confident side of myself and someone who's really much more ready to be a voice and to be a broadcaster, because I stepped into a completely different level of my leadership at this point.
And when you look at all the stuff that we've just spoken about, on this episode, about all the knowledge that you have, all the experience that you have, the fact that you knew how to set your strategy up and do your business, all of that knowledge, and yet knowing that you still felt that is so refreshing to hear, because we all have that for some part of our business, don't we? Where there's some demons to be dealt with.
Yeah. And so that one, letting people speak in. And then if you listen to the behind the scenes episode, the first one that I did on recording this podcast, I talk about being very intentional about who I even let into knowing that I was creating a podcast. Who I shared it with, who I shared any of the details with initially. And it was incredibly few people. Even my husband wasn't one of the first ones to hear about it. And it wasn't until I was rock solid certain about my direction and what I was doing that I started to share with people that this was what I was doing. Because that is my lesson learned. Like, some people do great with like public accountability and putting themselves out there and opening themselves up to all this kind of feedback initially. And that's not how I work best. That shuts me down. It makes me second guess. It makes me shrink. And even sometimes I don't tell my coach things because she will just ask a really good question like a coach would do. And I'm like, well, what does she really mean by that question?
Right.
Not so much anymore, because I realized that that's what I do. And I'll say to her, all right, I know you asked me this question, but I'm telling myself that you're asking me this question for this reason, right? Like, so I've learned that I have to communicate on that.
I love that whole meta thing of a coach being coached by a coach that's going on within that whole scenario.
Yeah, like, why is she asking me that? So, I've definitely learned some things about me. And that, I will say, was a big mistake that I made was listening to what other people say. I will say that, a big mistake that I made was sitting in resistance for too long. There was a whole time period in my business for about 12 months that I was so resistant to just everything. I was so shut down to everything. And I mean, listen, when I say I made these mistakes, I wouldn't go back and change them, because obviously they've made me who I am today. Sitting in resistance for a year has taught me how to get out of resistance. Sitting in resistance for a year sends a lot of clients my way who are struggling with being in resistance.
Right. So when you're in resistance to what? To growth?
Yeah, to growth, to making money.
Right.
I was resisting making money at one point. I was just like making it really hard on myself because it felt too easy. I've done it all, right? Like, we've all done this. And, for someone like me who I coach around mindset, because it's what I know at times makes a critical difference. You need strategy, and you need to be able to manage your energy, and you need to be able to build toughness, resiliency through ongoing mindset work. And that's like a hot topic in some communities at the moment. And then I watch people sit in their mind and do mindset work, but not take action.
Right. Okay. And the two need to go together.
You need to be able to quickly move through the resistance, the mindset work that you need to move through so that you can take action.
Yeah.
And it's not all about what's going on in the mind all the time. At some points, you just have to tell your ego to shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
With love.
It's true.
Those are definitely... Some of that was definitely in it for me. And listen, then the other thing is that we all have behavior patterns or thought processes that come from years and decades of programming from our families. And a big one for me was that there was not going to out them publicly. Maybe I have in the past even, I don't know. But there was a specific person in my life who I love dearly, who means the world to me, who as a child, every time I would speak my mind, and let me tell you something, I had a lot to say, would tell me to filter. Right? And like, she's like, oh, like Tara, like maybe you shouldn't have said that, right? Like maybe that wasn't the world's most appropriate thing for a 12-year-old to say or a 15-year-old to say. And you need to learn how to deliver your message with more tact. Valid point, right? Valid point. And yet for me, even as I started to build my business and as someone leading in their own business, you have to be the leader. You have to say the things. You have to go first. You have to speak up. You have to speak your truth. People have to know what you stand for, how you're different, why they should hire you. Mm. And you need to be able to tell them that without a filter.
That's a big shift right there.
Yeah. I mean, in my first year of business, you want to know where I invested my money? I invested my money very specifically in a coach to help me express myself more freely.
Right.
That's all we worked on was expressing myself more freely because I couldn't even submit a blog post at the time to Huffington Post because I was like so in my shit.
Oh my gosh. I remember that actually. Yes. And yet here we are now recording this first season of the podcast, Tara. Big shift.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so it's really a process to be moving through these things and to be constantly challenging yourself in your business to move through these things. I could talk about another mistake and then we could probably wrap it up because I think we've been going for quite a while now.
We have. But I like hearing your mistakes, though. Yeah, just to mitigate all that strategy that you had in place when you were a newbie. I like this bit.
Yeah. Okay. So actually one instance, 2 mistakes. So I went and I was telling you guys that the first month I launched this group program and I sold it to like 10 or 12 people. It was a success. I'm like, great, I'm going to do this again, knowing nothing about how to launch anything or how to warm up my audience to purchase or really communicate with people in a way that let them see the result or the impact of taking a program. And so I went out and I sold it. 2 people bought it. 1 person asked for a refund. Mm. So that was interesting for me because what that actually wound up doing was it really took a hit on my confidence. And there were a couple of things in my first year of business that kind of were like that took a hit on my confidence. But what the mistake that I made was believing that program was unworthy and not good enough or not of value.
Right.
And then
so this person asked for a refund and you made it mean that
correct.
It wasn't right.
Yeah. The fact that only 2 people bought, that 1 person asked for a refund, I made it mean something about my work. I took it personally. And that was really my first understanding of what your results really are. Yeah. Your results are feedback for the action you took. They are not good nor bad. They're just feedback for you to go back and go, okay, I took this action. And ultimately, your mindset is what drove the action. So you can even take that 1 step back and go, what was my mindset when I took this action? What was the action? What was the outcome? Let's not make this mean something. Let's not get emotional about this, but let's very logically look at the feedback here.
So in that situation, the result was that you sold 2, had 1 refund. The action was that, before that you perhaps hadn't planned it properly, you hadn't put a whole strategy in place. And the mindset before that was that your belief was that maybe it wasn't worthy of having this big plan.
Right. Or maybe there was just a lack of consciousness around what needed to go into creating value here for someone to buy. And so, that mistake, really had an impact on my confidence. And I did not sell that program again for probably another year. But then when I sold it the next year, it resulted in 5 figures worth of revenue in a 2-week period.
Right. So very different result.
Very different result. And what would have happened if I didn't make it mean something? Was I missing all of that revenue throughout the previous year? So, how are you leaving money on the table because of your lack of confidence in something?
And that's enormous. And that goes back to, what we were speaking about earlier, sort of thing, that you have this thing to sell, your mindset wasn't there. And that's why the hustle doesn't work and why you can't repeat it, right? Because, that first round sold and that was fine, but then you can't repeat it because you hadn't added the value, you got the mindset and created, the plan to make the result something that was sustainable. That's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah. So that was a relatively big mistake, but it actually led to something that has made my business the most successful in the sense that I really looked at how I could focus on selling a few quote unquote products, services, and not the many.
Okay.
So it allowed me, I was like, okay, selling this group program right now to my list takes way more time, effort, and energy than it does for me to sell people into one-on-one coaching with me.
Right.
Or a private intensive with me.
Yeah.
Or a smaller group program with me. So I decided at that time that I was going to take the next year to 18 months to really master selling one-on-one coaching with me and scaling that, because everybody says that you can't scale one-on-one coaching, that one-on-one coaching leads to burnout, but that's not the case for me, because my strength and what fuels me is one-on-one coaching. And that's why some of my programs are a little different, because that's really what energizes me. And so then I was like, I'm going to master this. And then I mastered selling people into these programs. And then it was like, I'm going to master the structure behind the scenes that allows me to scale one-on-one.
Right. So what did that look like?
Well, that's kind of like where I am now, right? So that's really been some of the work that I've done this year, in getting clear on what are the few things that I need to do in my business. What doesn't need to get done at all ever, because there's a lot of that. Because there's a lot of crap that people do, entrepreneurs, leaders in other people's businesses. There's a lot of things that people do that don't lead to a result or for an entrepreneur generating revenue. And letting those things go. And then really creating a system for my team so that the time it takes me to manage them is much less.
Okay.
And those are some of the things that we could probably talk about on that episode where we start to recap this year.
Yeah, that'd be great to unpack all those bits.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, those are the things that worked for me. Some of the key decisions that went into the foundation of my business. And I'm about to wrap up my 3rd year, go into my 4th year. And this is all very foundational. I don't expect to be operating like a business 20 years in the making at year 3. I think that people are in such a rush to build this business that meets certain revenue metrics, because that's what everybody else is doing, to the point where they potentially break their business and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so for me, there's a lot of presence and consciousness going into each one of these years in my business, and the lessons that I've learned, and what worked and what didn't work, and very intentionally growing something that feels sustainable to me, that can operate in a way that's not in a place of chaos and uncertainty, because I've got other things going on in my life. And so really how to build this business around my life. And that's really what I've been working on mastering for these last 3 years. Because if I wanted to chase unrealistic revenue goals, and I wanted to be on the hamster wheel, and I wanted to be sacrificing the things that are important to me, I could just go back to work for somebody else, and that would be quite easy.
Right.
I could bring home a wicked comfortable salary, amazing benefits, do the job with one hand tied behind my back and my eyes closed. So how are we going to wrap this up?
Well, I want to recall and just recap on what you said, because let's just rewind. You started your business and this is what you set the foundations with, right? You knew going in that in the first year, you weren't going to make profit. You knew that you were going to go in making a loss. That was huge. You went in with your credentials. You went in with all of your authority that existed, with your platform that you already had, and you took that with you. You went in with a strategy for how this was going to look for your business and for your life when you set this out. But then we had some mistakes going on. We had some mindset things. You sought feedback in the wrong arenas, or that held you back for confidence, that you allowed, some elements of feedback to hold you back confidence-wise. You took actions to sell programs that weren't aligned, and therefore you left some revenue on the table because you weren't in a place to sell something which could have sold higher figures. And you are aware that this is a foundational time. This is year 3. You aren't chasing an unrealistic metric. You know where you want to be. You've got a plan to get there. And there's demons along the way, but you're stepping out and sharing this journey with us. And we're here right now to share that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to give everybody permission to run their businesses in a way that works for them. That's if there's like the one big takeaway from this, right?
Yeah, I love that.
This is the stuff that worked for me. And I want to give everybody the permission and tell them that you absolutely can build a thriving, abundant business doing what you love on your terms.
That's so huge. And having that permission slip, like, just hearing you say that makes my shoulders unhunch, because it's a really strong reminder that, what your life looks like, Tara, what mine looks like is different for what, anybody else listening. Everyone has their own life, their own family stuff, their own ways that, they work, that strengthen them, that energize them, all of that stuff. So go on your terms. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. All right. So what do we need everybody to do right now, right? Because we need them to do a couple of things. We need them to subscribe, right? If you guys haven't subscribed yet to this podcast, please go ahead and subscribe so you are notified of when new episodes drop. If you haven't reviewed this podcast, please go over to iTunes and give us a review. We love to hear what everybody has to say. Give us your feedback. Tell us what you're liking.
Yeah.
Yeah. And head on over to the Bold Leadership Revolution on Facebook and send us some comments and tell us what insights and takeaways you had from today's episode, because we're going to be continuing the conversation over there. Right, Joe?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just share over there. There'll be the post with this podcast on it. So let us know in the comments which bits you really enjoyed from this episode, which parts of Tara's strategy and plan you really learned from, and which failures you can resonate with as well. We're all ears and we can't wait to have that conversation with you guys.
I love when you say bits, Joe.
Thanks, darling.
All right, everyone. Catch you on the next episode.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Bold Leadership Revolution podcast. This episode has ended, but our work continues online. Head over to theboldleadershiprevolution.com, where you'll find links to any resources mentioned in today's episode, along with other valuable tips and information that will help you lead bold. That's theboldleadershiprevolution.com.